All right, so you ready to get into this thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool.
Looking forward to it.
Today, we're going to be diving deep into this guide called Business Cash Flow Crisis: Strategies for Survival and Prevention. And, you're probably here because you're either in the middle of a cash flow crisis right now, maybe trying to avoid one, or you just love those business survival stories.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love a good comeback story?
Right.
It's always inspiring.
So either way, we're going to pull out the most valuable and actionable stuff from this guide so you can walk away, feeling prepared, not panicked.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? Like knowledge is power when it comes to these situations.
Absolutely.
The more you know, the better equipped you are to handle whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And one of the things that really struck me about this guide was how it tackled this common misconception head on, right? This idea that businesses, they go under just because they've run out of money.
Right. It's not always about having $0 in the bank.
Right.
It's really the reaction to that shortage that makes or breaks them.
It's so true. And it's kind of like in our personal lives too, right? We've all felt that oh no, I'm broke feeling. But it's rarely about literally having $0.
Yeah.
It's that moment of panic when you realize you might not be able to cover everything that's coming due.
Yeah, it's that feeling of what am I going to do now?
Right, exactly.
How am I going to make this work?
So what does the guide say about how to handle that initial panic, when it comes to your business?
Well, it uses this analogy of, think of it like a medical emergency.
Okay.
Like you're in triage mode.
Okay, I like that.
First, you got to assess the damage, right? Get a clear picture of where things actually stand.
Okay, so no burying your head in the sand.
Exactly. No ostrich strategy here.
Shot it. So what's next?
Then you got to move to prioritizing survival, right? You figure out what are the absolutely essential expenses, the ones you cannot function without.
Like keeping the lights on, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Things like payroll, rent, utilities, those kinds of
The
things.
must-have.
Yeah, the lifeblood of your business.
Okay, so you've triaged the essentials. What then?
Then it's time to call for help.
Okay.
And this is where speed is key. Every minute counts, just like in that medical emergency we were talking about.
Every second counts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the guide emphasizes finding quick funding sources, things like emergency loans,
Yeah.
maybe tapping into personal savings if you have to, or seeing if you qualify for any government grants.
Makes sense.
Anything to get that cash flow moving.
Right. And speaking of getting cash fast, the guide also mentions, collecting on those outstanding invoices.
Oh, yeah, that's like finding money you didn't know you had.
Right.
It's already owed to you.
Exactly.
You just got to collect it.
So how do we go about doing that?
Well, the guide stresses that clear, assertive communication with your clients is crucial here.
Okay, so no more being shy about it.
Right, exactly. Be polite but firm, you know?
Be professional but direct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes offering a small discount for early payment can be a good motivator too.
Yeah. A little incentive can go a long way.
For sure.
Now, what about this idea of invoice factoring? I know some business owners use it, but can you give us a quick explanation of what that actually is?
Yeah, so it's essentially like selling your unpaid invoices to a factoring company.
Okay.
So you get the cash right away, which is the big advantage, but you'll typically get a bit less than the full invoice value.
Gotcha.
It's like a short-term loan, essentially.
Okay, so there's a trade-off there.
Exactly. There's always a trade-off.
You're getting the cash quickly, but you're giving up a little bit of the profit.
Yeah, you got to weigh the costs and benefits.
It sounds like something you'd want to explore very carefully.
Absolutely. The guide goes into more detail on the pros and cons, but the main takeaway is that it's an option.
Yeah, it's there if you need it.
Exactly. It's a tool in your toolbox.
All right, so we've triaged the essentials we've looked for that found money. What's the next step in this survival plan?
Okay, so now it's time to trim the fat. And the guide doesn't sugarcoat it. You need to be ruthless about cutting any non-essential expenses.
Oh, man, that's tough to hear.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's necessary.
I mean, everything feels important when you're running a business,
I know, it's hard to let go.
Where do you even begin?
Well, the guide has some practical suggestions.
Okay, good.
It talks about auditing all your subscriptions, those recurring costs for software or services that can really add up.
Oh, yeah, those sneaky subscriptions.
Yeah, they can really drain your bank account.
Especially if you're not even using them.
Exactly. So take a close look at those.
Okay, what else?
Then there's rent negotiation. You might be surprised what's possible if you just have an open conversation with your landlord about maybe lowering your rent or getting more flexible payment terms.
So communication is key again.
Absolutely. Those honest conversations can make a huge difference.
Whether it's with clients, landlords, suppliers.
Yeah, anyone you're doing business with?
Okay, good to know.
And another thing the guide suggests is utilizing freelancers for specific tasks instead of, taking on the cost of a full-time employee.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when you need to keep projects moving forward, but you don't want to, add to your payroll.
Right. It's all about being strategic.
Okay. But I imagine all of this cost cutting, it can feel pretty intense, right? Not
Yeah.
just financially, but emotionally too.
You're right. It's a tough process, and the guide acknowledges that
Okay.
it can be emotionally draining to make those difficult choices.
Yeah,
It can feel like you're sacrificing parts of your vision,
absolutely.
but sometimes you have to make those strategic cuts in order to survive and eventually, grow stronger.
You got to do what you got to do.
Right.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to take a step back to take two steps forward.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about like stopping the bleeding, so to speak. How about boosting that cash flow? What does the guide say about generating revenue quickly when you're in a pinch?
Well, this is where the hustle comes in. The guide recommends looking at pre-selling. You know, Offering products or services upfront at a discount can be a great way to get an influx of cash. And it also highlights the importance of focusing on your high margin products or services, the ones that really bring in the profit.
Right, those are the ones that are really moving the needle.
Yeah.
But how do you identify those golden geese, so to speak? Does the guide offer any tips on that?
Yeah, it emphasizes knowing your numbers inside and out. Really analyze your product line or services and see which ones consistently deliver the highest profit margin. Sometimes it's the unexpected things that are your real money makers.
Okay, so it's not always about just selling more, it's about selling smarter.
Exactly. It's about being strategic with your offerings.
I like that. And then there's this whole strategy of shifting to a subscription model. The guide really seems to champion this as a way to create more stable, predictable revenue over time.
Right. Instead of relying on those one-off sales, you're building a more consistent income stream.
Okay, so it's all about building that financial cushion and smoothing out those cash flow bumps.
Exactly. It's about creating a more sustainable business model.
Okay, so what if you've tried all these things, cutting costs, hustling for revenue, and you're still struggling? The guide talks about seeking external help, right? That can be a tough step for a lot of business owners.
It can be, but the guide stresses that asking for funding is a smart business move when you need it. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of taking control. And there are lots of options out there, from short-term loans offered by banks or fintech companies to crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter or GoFundMe.
And of course, there's always the option of pitching to investors.
Right. If your business has strong potential, securing investor funding could be the key to not only surviving, but scaling to new heights.
Hmm.
Remember, even companies like Apple took a loan from Microsoft back in '97 when they were on the brink of bankruptcy.
It's amazing how some of these big-name companies like Apple, Starbucks, even Amazon have all faced their own cash flow challenges at some point.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even the most successful businesses go through rough patches. It's all about how you adapt and make those tough decisions and implement the right strategies. The guide is full of those real-life examples.
It's inspiring to see how they navigated those challenges.
For sure. It gives you hope that you can do it too.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about long-term prevention. How can business owners avoid finding themselves in this crisis mode again? What does the guide suggest?
Well, this is where the guide shifts from crisis management to proactive planning. It emphasizes building a financial cushion, that emergency fund for those unexpected bumps in the road.
Like a financial safety net. How much does the guide recommend setting aside?
It recommends aiming for at least 3 to 6 months worth of operating expenses. It might seem like a big number, especially if you're just starting out or recovering from a cash crunch, but think of it as an investment in your peace of mind.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about day-to-day cash flow management? Any tips there?
The guide really hammers home the importance of tracking your cash flow regularly. You need to know exactly where your money is going and when, so you can make informed decisions. There are great tools out there like QuickBooks or Wave that can automate a lot of this for you.
So no more shoeboxes full of receipts.
Exactly. And then there's the system called Profit First that the guide really dives into. Have you heard of it?
I have, but I'd love to hear you explain it.
Sure. It's a really interesting approach to financial management. Instead of the traditional sales minus expenses equals profit, Profit First flips the script. You allocate a predetermined percentage of your revenue to Profit First, then set aside money for expenses, taxes, and so on.
So you're prioritizing profit from the start instead of treating it as an afterthought. I like that.
Right, and the guide explains that by consistently doing this, you're essentially building a buffer against those cash flow fluctuations.
Yeah.
It's a way to create more stability and predictability in your business. The guide actually recommends aiming to allocate 5% of your revenue to profit when you're just starting out, then gradually increasing that as your business grows.
Okay, so there's a specific system to it. It's not just about taking profit whenever you can.
Exactly. The guide actually breaks it down into specific percentages for different types of businesses, which is really helpful. For example, a service-based business with a revenue under $250,000 might allocate 5% to profit, 50% to owner's compensation, 15% to taxes, and 30% to operating expenses.
Wow, that's super helpful to have those concrete numbers. You know, as we're talking about all this, it strikes me that a lot of these strategies, whether it's collecting payments, cutting costs, or even seeking funding, they really require a mindset shift.
You're absolutely right. The guide subtly emphasizes that throughout. It's about moving away from that reactive, fear-based approach to money and embracing a more proactive, empowered mindset. It's about seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
And I think that's where those real-life examples from the guide are so powerful. You see companies like Dell Computers who implemented that just-in-time inventory model, getting customers to pay before production even started.
What a brilliant way to minimize cash flow risk and fuel growth. And then you have Airbnb, who made strategic cuts during those early lean times, focusing on organic growth instead of blowing their budget on expensive marketing campaigns.
And that frugality helped them weather the storm and ultimately build a global brand. Tesla is another great example. They use pre-orders to finance production, essentially having their customers fund their growth.
Such a clever way to turn a challenge into an opportunity. And it highlights another key takeaway from the guide innovation. Sometimes the most effective solutions come from thinking outside the box and finding creative ways to overcome those financial obstacles.
It's not just about survival. It's about thriving. These companies didn't just weather the storm, they came out stronger and more resilient.
Exactly. And that's the ultimate takeaway. By understanding and managing cash flow effectively, you're not just setting yourself up for survival, you're creating a foundation for sustainable growth and long-term success.
And speaking of resources, I have to mention the guide's recommended reading list. There are some real gems in there.
Oh, absolutely. Books like The Lean Startup, which dives into building a business with minimal waste and financial intelligence for entrepreneurs, which helps demystify those financial statements.
And of course, we can't forget Profit First, which we just discussed. The guide really seems to champion that system as a powerful tool for shifting your financial mindset.
It's all about making profit a priority, not an afterthought, which can make a huge difference in the long run.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from immediate triage tactics to long-term planning, but I have a feeling there's still a lot to unpack.
Oh, there is. This deep dive has just scratched the surface, but hopefully it's given you a solid foundation to build upon.
So much good stuff in this guide, so much to think about.
Yeah, it's really packed with insights.
Definitely. Before we wrap up this deep dive, though, I always had to ask, what's that one big idea that you want our listener to walk away with today?
You know, going back to the beginning of our conversation, it's really about remembering that cash flow is the lifeblood of any business. You can have a great product, a solid team, a killer marketing plan, but if you don't have a handle on your cash flow, you're setting yourself up for trouble.
You're going to hit some roadblocks eventually.
Exactly. It's not just about surviving those tough times either. It's about building a business that can truly thrive.
So we're not just talking about keeping the lights on, we're talking about growth and expansion.
Exactly. When you understand and manage your cash flow effectively, you're creating that foundation for sustainable growth. It gives you the freedom to pursue opportunities, invest in your business and weather those inevitable storms that come along.
And we've seen that with so many companies that we admire, right? Like Starbucks, Dell, Airbnb, Tesla, Apple, Amazon. They all face their share of cash flow challenges, but they figured it out.
Absolutely. They adapted, they innovated, and they ultimately came out stronger on the other side.
They didn't just survive, they thrived.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that you're not alone in this. Every business owner faces these challenges at some point. The key is to be proactive, to keep learning and to be willing to adapt and evolve as your business grows.
So it's all about that growth mindset, taking those challenges and turning them into opportunities for learning and improvement.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. This deep dive is just the beginning. There's a whole world of resources out there, books, articles, podcasts, mentors to help you navigate this world of business finance.
Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
Absolutely. There's no shame in reaching out for support.
And speaking of resources, if this deep dive has sparked your interest in that Profit First system, I highly recommend checking out the book by Mike Michalowicz. It's a fantastic resource for really shifting your financial mindset and making profit a priority from day one.
Yeah, that book has been a game changer for so many businesses. I can't recommend it enough.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into business cash flow crises. We hope you've walked away with some valuable insights and a renewed sense of confidence when it comes to managing your business finances.
Until next time, remember to keep learning, keep growing, and keep that cash flowing.
And don't forget to check out that book.
Yes, profit first.